A lot of people struggle the most with, I guess, changing their beliefs, the framework in which they view the world. How do you help people through that so that they can go from who they were before to the new joyful version of who they want to be?
I spend a lot of time with validation. It sounds so simple. Oh, yeah, I could do that. I could talk about my feelings. You'd be surprised at how difficult it is, and, in some cases, it's so hard for people to acknowledge their feelings that I have to like literally put a paper in front of them with different faces and say, like, let's pick the one that's closest to you. Similar to what we do with children, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're in this constant mode of everything's fine, everything's okay, I just get through it, and you don't really sit still enough to really tap into how you feel, you may need a lot of help, right? Getting to just identifying the emotions. And then let's say you finally are able to do this through some of the exercises in my book. Expressing the feelings can be very challenging, right? Imagine if you're someone who's struggled with low self-worth and your whole identity is tied up in your role. It's hard to say to people, I need help. I'm tired. I need a break. I need to slow down. It may feel like a personal failure. So in these cases, I have to work with slowly exposing yourself to this idea. So it could look like venting to yourself initially, right? Like looking in a mirror and saying it out loud, or expressing it in writing, or writing a letter to your younger self, and saying, like, you didn't have to be perfect. They would have loved you anyway, right? There are all these exercises that I provide because it is a slow process and it can be very challenging. But the first two V's are where you really want to start if you're someone who has a hard time letting go. And then the values part, like there are so many times people don't even know what they value. Like recently I spoke to someone who, really couldn't remember their childhood. And I have to educate people that forgetting your past is a trauma response. Your brain will, dampen your memories so that you don't remember things that are painful, right? So that you're not triggered. And I have to work with some clients to get back to that point when they did value things, like, and it's usually before a traumatic incident, like the loss of a parent or the, divorce of a parent or like a family tragedy. And when we find out, what they valued before that incident, then we start to work slowly with that person to get back into that. So, for example, I worked with a client who they didn't remember what they really valued. They were in a high-powered job, making a lot of money. Why am I happy? I have everything. Why am I not fulfilled? Well, it turned out that there was a time in their lives when they had scarcity trauma and they didn't have much, but they were still joyful. And what they did when they were like much younger, when they didn't have much, was they spent a lot of time with other people who didn't have a lot. So they had kind of lost that sense of community. They were part of a community where like all the kids didn't have much, but they didn't need much. They would play with like boxes. They'd play with trash, essentially, stay out late hours of the night playing, in the street, playing sports when it was safe. But they lost that. Now the friends that they had were all, people who cared about money, who cared about status, who were like very superficial. And they just didn't feel as if they were around people who were really real. And so I had to work with this person to try and rebuild their community because, again, relationships are the number one predictor of your long-term happiness. So if your relationships are toxic, if they're unhealthy, if they're shallow, then you feel empty, right? And so I had to work with this person to try and either reconnect with these childhood friends or to find like-minded people who were not all about bling, all about, the hustle and the perceived status, who were actually about community and connection and meaningful connections that mattered.
Yeah. How do you work with someone and find out like the one thing that they should focus on? For example, that person, it was community. For someone else, it might be like a hobby. Where do you start and how do you find out that like the priority?
Early in my book, I talk about the biopsychosocial. So one of the easiest steps to understand the science of your happiness is to understand your basic science, right? And in medical school, we learn about the biopsychosocial. It sounds fancy and hard, but it's actually quite easy and brilliant. And if you think about yourself as a human being, biologically, your biological factors are going to be different than mine, right? For example, I have hypothyroidism, a low thyroid condition, right? So, sometimes I'm going to be tired. Sometimes my thyroid will make me anxious, but other people may have other conditions like autoimmune diseases, right? Psychologically, I have different traumas than another person. So I have a history of scarcity trauma and also personal traumas, whereas another person may have a past history of, let's say, physical trauma or like a motor vehicle accident or even combat, and also within psychological of the biopsychosocial, there's attachment style, right? Some people may have avoidant attachment, anxious attachment, mixture of anxious, avoidant, or, secure. There are other resiliency factors within your psychological background. And then socially, I'm in New York, you're on the West Coast, so we're in different social settings. You may have more access to nature. I have access to a city. I have a busy job. Some people are in, workplaces that are toxic. Some people are in relationships that are toxic. Some people have sedentary behaviors or diets that are not healthy, right? So your social factors are important. So when you understand the biopsychosocial that's unique to you, right? Because the science of your happiness matters, then you know where to start. So if someone has heavy biological factors, let's say they have an autoimmune disease, I may want to focus there and
Yeah.
say, let's focus on your vitals, right? Of the 5 E's. Let's get you plugged into a good medical team. Let's make sure that, you're on the right biologics to help decrease the inflammation, because inflammation worsens your brain and your body and your mental
Yeah.
health. And for that person, I may also want to focus on the social, right? The social part is like eating and movement. Maybe they need to work with a trainer. Maybe they need to work with a nutritionist to eat low inflammatory foods, right? So I'm not going to be like, well, let's process your trauma if your biological factors are what's really impeding your happiness, right? So in that case, I would say, let's use the 5 E's to support you biologically, right? But in another person who doesn't have the biological, factors that are very stressful, who has a heavy, trauma history, I'm not going to be like, let's focus on your social and let's give you kale, right? Like, let's work on your diet. I'm going to say, let's work on that trauma. Let's start
Yeah.
processing the trauma so that you're not always in fight or flight. So you're not always like ready to go throw down with someone who you perceive as being, disrespectful, when actually maybe they weren't, right? But you're in fight or flight. And for someone who, let's say they don't have any biological and the trauma history isn't that heavy, or that, but socially, they're currently in a toxic work environment that demands of them everything, right? Let's say they work in a hospital and they have to be on call all the time, and they're, treated poorly and they don't eat. Well, I'm going to say, well, let's maybe focus there. Maybe we need to figure out what you value in life, right? Let's figure out why you went into healthcare. Because if you went in to help people, but you're actually feeling as if you're not really helping people, you're in a broken system, you need to shift gears, then we need to work there, right? So everyone's going to have a different biopsychosocial, and you could use the 5 E's to target the areas of your biopsychosocial that is tailored to you. Again, because you're the only one who will ever exist the way you are. And it's a way for me to bring the science to you so you can literally be your own scientist in your healing journey of understanding the science of your happiness.
Amazing. Yeah, the way you lay it out, biopsychosocial. I love that you're giving us frameworks for understanding like our story, how we are different from others, and everyone's solution is a little different. Another question I have for you. So, say a listener has someone in their life that they know is struggling with high functioning depression or something similar. What is the first step that you recommend that they do if they really want to help them? Like, some people don't want to admit it. They don't want to be helped. Like, I guess, how do you deal with these situations?
A lot of people don't want to share. They don't want to seem like less than. They don't want to seem like they're disappointing. And so I think that letting them know that no matter what, they're not a disappointment. One of the symptoms of depression is feeling guilt and shame, and you internalize blame. And so I think starting off with, if you slow down, I would understand. If you expressed how you felt, you wouldn't disappoint me. So, like, really helping them challenge that core belief that they are not worthy if they are not pathologically productive can be so powerful. And you see this a lot with moms. Moms are so guilty all the time. Like, I don't want to let my kid down, my boss down, my team down. But, the people in your life, they want you to slow down. They want you to ask for help. It makes them feel good when they feel useful to you, right? It's no fun to be around someone who doesn't need you all the time, right? And so I think that could be very powerful information for an individual, because they don't believe that. They seriously believe that they don't have that permission to slow down, that they're letting others down. They feel guilty. So, reassure them of that. And they may not believe you the first time, but over time, you keep repeating it, it'll sink in.
Hmm.
And also don't necessarily wait for them to break down, right? The same goes for, regular people as it is for healthcare. Why are we waiting for people to break down? When we see the signs, we need to intervene. So if you can tell when someone has lost joy, when they don't have spark, like check in with them. There's this meme, check in with your strong friends. But it's the truth. Everyone thinks that people who are the rocks don't ever experience breakdown, but rocks chip, right? They crack.
Hmm. Absolutely.
And two things can be true. You can be strong, but you can also have challenges. And check in with your friends. And when they say that they're fine, follow up. Don't accept that. Follow up with, how are you really doing? How are you
Yeah.
really doing it all?
Yeah, can you give us more simple scripts that we should say? What you said in the beginning was great, but like, yeah, maybe repeat it. What are some scripts or some things that we should say to these people in our lives?
One of the things that's great is, and people say this to me all the time, you're doing so many things. Like, how are you doing them all so well? And I used to say, well, I have a great team. But now I say, I have a great team and I am really tired. It's hard. Sometimes I don't even
Yeah.
know how I do it. And then there's a relief because people are like, phew, good. There's nothing wrong with me. Cause like she's doing it all, making it look easy, but she's tired too. Right.
Yeah.
And it builds a community, right? Like there's a vulnerability that happens when you share, when you're not just like buttoned up. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. No, don't worry. I could do it myself.
Yeah. Oh, you're saying like be vulnerable first, be honest first, and then
Yes,
it opens it up for them to be honest as well.
it does. It allows community and connection,
Oh, yeah.
right? Because if you can't relate and it seems as if you're just like checking in, but you're not sharing, then the person's not going to want to share either. And it's okay to empathize in that way, right? It's an empathic intervention in psychiatry talk and therapy talk, right? By
Yeah.
you saying, sometimes I feel tired, but I don't want to let people down either. That is an intervention because you're putting yourself in their shoes and they feel like, okay, if you're sharing, then, you're not unlovable. You're not unworthy. So I'm not unlovable or unworthy either. And don't expect them to share automatically. Don't expect them to say, okay, you're sharing, I'm going to share. That is not the way that many people are built. Sometimes they will just listen.
Yeah, it just takes time.
It'll sink in. And the more they hear it, the more that they may feel eventually comfortable. And also they may never share with you, but they don't feel alone in it when you share, when you show that you're vulnerable and you're willing to listen.
I love that so much. It gives us more ideas because I think a lot of people kind of go from say someone's like a really ambitious person, hard worker, people just say like, you're amazing. You're doing more than I could ever have. It's kind of like it goes unsaid. The thought that, oh, I think you might be like suffering or you're doing too much. But like, it comes out as like compliments because I don't think people know how to approach it sometimes.
I use a lot of humor. And one thing I hear all the time is, you're a rock star, you're killing it. And I say, oh, no, 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 I'm not killing it. It's killing me. And they just laugh.
I love that.
I'm like, this is eventually going to kill me. I need to slow down. And they laugh. And it's like, wow, like you're human too, right? It's a point of joy. Making someone else laugh and smile. I just got a point that day, right?